Welcome to this informational presentation on the proposal by LifeBridge and their developer partner, HarborLight. We began researching the LifeBridge expansion proposal after discovering that many of our neighbors, like ourselves, really didn't know much about it beyond what LifeBridge presented to the community last November. We saw the size of the building and reflected on how it would change the character of the neighborhood. Then our small informal group gathered to hear from members of the Greater Endicott Street Neighborhood Association, or GESNA, to hear what they have learned and their experiences of living with LifeBridge over the years. At the same time, the issue of homelessness grew in Salem public discourse, including increased presence of panhandlers and the encampments behind Wendy's, and the resulting camping ordinance, which attracted considerable discussion from the public, whether for or against. With so many perspectives being brought forward, our group dug in deeper to better understand the LifeBridge project and consider possible impacts on the city, to its residents, businesses, tourists, but most importantly, the proposed model of care for the population this project would serve, the homeless people who have been left curiously absent from these public meetings. We've read studies on shelter models and care methodologies. We've discussed countless articles on what's worked and what hasn't worked in other American cities as well as abroad. To better understand local conditions, we've shared incident reports of our neighbors, requested police records, and reread zoning ordinances and public policy papers. The presentation that follows is a condensed version of our findings based on these facts, and the considerations we'd like to offer are derived from these many months of research and discussion. Again, it is our intention to present you with our understanding of what LifeBridge is proposing. We'll also share with you what we've learned about the many aspects of the homeless population on the North Shore, the plan for the new facility, the potential impacts on the city and tourism, and a view of what other cities have experienced. A caveat: when we talk about homelessness today, we are not talking about migrants. These are two distinct groups. Migrants arriving in Massachusetts are managed by the state government, whereas unhoused domestic citizens must rely on individual cities and towns, which has its own benefits and challenges. Secondly, broadly speaking, there are many reasons why people can be homeless. These include escaping domestic abuse, substance abuse, mental health illness, sexual abuse, temporary financial difficulties. This means a person is overwhelmed with a previous or existing issue or trauma, sometimes in combination, where living on the street is a viable and reasonable alternative to the circumstances that they are escaping. Therefore, it is not only inaccurate but unhelpful to denigrate the homeless as losers, lazy, or to suggest that they suffer from some kind of moral failing. Salem has always understood this. A number of organizations formed over the centuries to address a variety of issues to assist these individuals. Most of these continue today and are broadly supported by the people of Salem. This is who we are. More than many other communities, Salem's residents have always pitched in to help. Homelessness is not just a Salem problem. It's a crisis at a national and even international scale. Why has Salem's homeless population exploded? One reason is simply that it's considered a good place for the homeless. We have gained a reputation for easy panhandling from tourists. Panhandling is protected speech, according to the Supreme Court. It cannot be banned or fined. And the community itself has a reputation for being more supportive than some others. A second reason, fairly or unfairly, is LifeBridge itself providing food and beds. Police departments in other cities on the North Shore, as well as Boston, bring or direct people to LifeBridge. The closing of Boston's mass casts created an additional influx of homeless people seeking services in Salem. Salem's encampments, especially the highly visible South River encampment, heightened public concern. An important outcome of the recently passed anti-camping ordinance is that the city is responsible for campers and their belongings. The city is now responsible for finding qualifying shelter beds within 15 miles. If no shelter beds are available, the ordinance permits a 3-day allowance for campers to remain in place. Furthermore, as the Salem ordinance carried language from the Boston anti-camping ordinance, this means the city of Boston, 14 miles away, can look to send their homeless population to Salem when their shelter beds are at full capacity. Even after clearance of the South River encampment behind Wendy's, which this picture illustrates, another encampment appeared within a couple weeks. This encampment featured a completely different population, new people, many not from the North Shore, but who are characterized as tougher, more intimidating by local residents familiar with the North Shore homeless population. Encampment is a problem in the winter, but warmer months bring even more outside sleepers. To handle increased numbers from these encampments, LifeBridge, with city support, opened an emergency shelter on the site of LifeBridge's thrift store on Canal Street. It's worth noting that this is in violation of current zoning, and the city did not notify abutting neighbors. LifeBridge's policy for the emergency shelter applies no restriction for substance abuse, which may attract to the neighborhood the attention of dealers who prey on this population. This is an interior view of a new emergency shelter on Canal Street, bunk beds. Its problems include 1 toilet room with 3 stalls, no shower, no laundry, no changing area. Men and women are mixed in one space, and there is no personal security. There is no accommodation for women who are victims of sexual assault, abuse, or trafficking. We have heard anecdotally that there have been several assaults on women. They are unreported because the victims don't want to involve the police. It's easy to understand why some prefer camping to a shelter. It's an environment they can control. It can be safer. Individuals have the agency to choose who they shelter with, and they can maintain control of their possessions. LifeBridge provides accommodations in 2 kinds of facilities. The first is shelter beds. This is overnight accommodation, like the bunk beds at the Margin Street shelter across from Riley Plaza. The second is single-room occupancy units, known as SROs. This is longer-term housing in rooms in buildings next to the Margin Street shelter facility. We looked at shelter bed counts across the North Shore. We discovered that bed counts posted on the LifeBridge website do not necessarily coincide with what a staff member reports, nor is the website information itself consistent. These counts came from a direct phone survey we conducted with shelter staff and public health officials in cities and towns throughout the North Shore. This is a visual representation of relative bed numbers and population. Salem is in green. On the left is the relative number of beds. On the right is the relative size of the populations. Salem today offers more adult shelter beds than any other North Shore city except Lynn, which it matches. Lynn is more than twice Salem's population. In the LifeBridge HarborLight proposal, Salem's bed count, 126 beds, assuming the Canal Street allotment continues, will effectively equal the bed count of Beverly, Gloucester, and Lynn combined, 130. What does this mean? If the city is looking for other shelter beds to relocate people in encampments, they will not be found on the North Shore. Let's look at the SRO units. Single-room occupancy units are traditionally defined as rooms for single individuals with communal baths and kitchens. Residents are long-term occupants versus overnight as in shelters. They are permitted to keep their things in the unit. LifeBridge SROs are for single adults, unmarried, no pets, and sober. LifeBridge currently provides 22 units of SRO housing in 2 buildings adjacent to the shelter. Some of us may not even know they were there. HarborLight proposes to expand the SRO units from 22 to 78 units. These units will be, in effect, small studio apartments with their own kitchens and baths for single adults without pets. Let's take a quick look at the history of this project. Going way back, the greater Endicott Street neighborhood, abutting today's LifeBridge and circled in blue on this map, was waterfront. It was also the center of Salem's African American community. But by 1900, it was the home of new immigrants, mostly Italians from southern Italy and Sicily. When the Great Fire destroyed much of the area in 1914, they rebuilt it. And they went on to build, literally and figuratively, much of the city in the following decades. In 1925, they built the cornerstone of their community, St. Mary's Italian Church. Despite a healthy congregation, it was sold by the Archdiocese of Boston in 2004. The Salem Mission, which we now know as LifeBridge, opened its shelter the following year. The story of the church and its meaning to the neighborhood is both compelling and poignant. You'll find it in the Gesna position paper on their website. In the intervening 20 years, Gesna residents have lived with LifeBridge, not always comfortably. Activists have called them NIMBYs, an acronym for Not in My Backyard. But as they have pointed out, LifeBridge and its residents are already in their backyards, literally in their backyards, leaving behind sleeping bags, needles, excrement. Even so, Gesna residents have consistently been among the few people in the city who actually talk to and befriend many of the homeless. They know what's going on. In the meantime, LifeBridge has grown, absorbing other organizations on the North Shore like Grace Center in Gloucester and River House in Beverly. The Salem shelter is now called Seeds of Hope. And of course, LifeBridge has established and expanded its thrift shop, which is a significant source of its revenue. According to LifeBridge, they were put on notice by the state a few years ago that their shelter bed spacing did not meet state standards. They embarked on a project to mitigate the problem with the initial goal of adding 10 beds to the existing 50. LifeBridge partnered with HarborLight Homes, a nonprofit developer based in Beverly, known mostly for affordable and elderly housing. We are not entirely certain how or when they teamed up, but it appears that they began conversations with the former Driscoll administration in 2022. LifeBridge and HarborLight now have visibility across the North Shore as reflected in their boards. You'll notice that Salem has no resident on the LifeBridge board despite past public promises. It is now clear that the combined goal of LifeBridge HarborLight is to make Salem the regional homeless center of the North Shore, covering the area north of Lynn and east of Route 95. In the name of efficiencies, they want to concentrate homeless services and administration in a new headquarters in the Civic Center of Salem. So let's take a look at the proposal itself. First, some orientation. In the foreground is Riley Plaza, and you'll recognize the church. To the left on Endicott, just visible around the corner, is the 1.5-story Christopher Columbus Society. At the corner is a 3-story yellow brick apartment building owned by LifeBridge, which contains 12 SRO units. At the far right, you'll see a 4-story red brick building also owned by LifeBridge, It has 10 SROs. Just in front of it is a small brick building, which is a privately owned recording studio, apparently with some national reputation. Steve's Market is to the right, just across the street. Behind it all is the Gesna neighborhood, with parking and a playground on Pratt Street. The most recent drawings have not been publicly presented. Dated February 2024, these were quietly leaked to us in April 2024. We were uncertain if they were a trial balloon, but the reality of their intention was confirmed by a new image on a recent post on Christine Medor's Salem Commoner website. You might remember Christine as the former Ward 2 city councilor. She is a senior staff member at the Massachusetts Housing Partnership and a state appointee to the Salem Redevelopment Authority. The key elements include demolition of 2 existing buildings and replacing them as part of the new larger facility. For example, the Columbus Society building was a parking lot in previous versions, but is now a 4-story structure including a ground floor garage. The corner yellow brick apartment building has been demolished and is now part of the new 4-story building. And at the other end, we see on this plan that the recording studio has also been acquired and replaced. It currently seems that negotiations for this parcel have not been successful, but the long-term game plan is very clear. The existing SRO building on High Street remains. On this plan, the blue-green section shows the facility controlled by HarborLight. Orange-brown areas will be LifeBridge. So looking from left to right, at the far left on this ground floor plan, you can see the new parking garage. The green space is the Christopher Columbus Bar, which advertises the cheapest beer in town, perhaps an issue for residents with sobriety struggles. SRO studio apartments are in light blue. In light brown is the thrift store, which prevents obvious problems in terms of drop-off, pickup, and customer and staff parking, including 2 LifeBridge trucks. And finally, in dark brown, you see the LifeBridge dining and day spaces in the church and adjacent structures. There is minimal outside space except for an area next to the sidewalk called the terrace, and what appear to be back alleys between the back of the building and the playground retaining wall. Second floor uses include 20 SRO units per floor, studio apartments shown in blue. The church and adjacent structures are filled entirely with shelter beds. Shown here are 76 beds, men and women mixed. In the blue HarborLight section are 2 more floors of SRO units. In the LifeBridge area are workforce development spaces and several undesignated spaces on the 3rd floor. These might be for training, offices, or even future shelter expansion. Offices are shown on the 4th floor. This rendering is the view from Riley Plaza. Some caveats apply to any architectural drawing of this sort. It is what's called a drone's eye view, as if you are hovering 15 or 20 feet up. It provides more information, but it tends to distort the experience of the building's massing and scale. It's not a sidewalk on-the-ground experience. No other familiar landmarks or context are shown to provide scale. Note that the actual building is bigger than depicted here. It extends to the left by the equivalent of another 2 bays, and the extension up Endicott Street will be visible because of the angle of the street. The church has been given what is called a facadectomy. The front has been sliced off, in this case to a depth of maybe 10 or 15 feet, and the rest of the volume of the building is consumed by new adjacent structures. Note the height of the HarborLight building at the left compared to the church. This is the view from the High Street corner. The segmented building on the corner is the site of the recording studio, which, as we've said, has not yet been acquired. The existing High Street brick SRO building is the next one up at the right. Steve's Market is to the far right, out of the frame. More caveats. This is still a drone's eye view. The wide-angle view distorts the width of the street lanes and the sidewalk, and there is minimal background context. The perspective extends to nowhere. Note the terrace in front of the second white building. This is the view from Walsh Insurance. Here, the drone's eye view has descended to maybe 10 feet off the ground. It's still not a sidewalk view. Steve's Market is not shown. The building at the left has been cut off so you don't see its full size. The Christopher Columbus bar is partially visible as the storefront at the left. Just to the right of the bar, you can see 5 studio apartments at the sidewalk. Note the loss of green space, which means that with so many more occupants, the Riley Plaza flag circle will be a busy place. This is the image that was recently posted on Christine Medore's Town Commoner website. It shows the view at the corner of Endicott Street. Here, the drone has climbed back up. The recording studio replacement is no longer included. Steve's Market and the post office are not shown. Note that, once again, the entire building is not shown. It actually extends to the left for another 3 bays, the equivalent of the 2 beige and 1 brick bays shown here on Endicott Street. And note the height of this building relative to the church. What you can't see is the relationship to the height of the existing 1- and 2.5-story buildings on Endicott Street. Outlined in red is the area that LifeBridge HarborLight refer to as their campus. It suggests implications for the city in terms of future economic development, other potential housing opportunities, and for the city's tax base. Consider the adjacent parcels at Steve's Market and the Gedney Street retail strip, the House of Pizza, and Walsh Insurance. So what are the implications for the Steve's Market site and the retail on Gedney? Consider this. What uses will be desirable or compatible other than a sale to HarborLight? We need affordable housing, which is often combined with market rate to subsidize it. Who will pay market rate to live next door to a 76-bed shelter? Will families with kids live here? We also need elderly housing and housing for the disabled, people who would benefit from a downtown location and proximity to the train. But they would also be the most vulnerable populations in this context. And finally, remember that the building replacing all the yellow brick buildings you see in the foreground will be the height of the peak of the church roof, possibly a bit more. That sunlit playground will be a thing of the past. Think like a chess player. What are the implications for other properties, for Walsh Insurance, for House of Pizza, for the buildings on the other side of Riley Plaza? Perhaps this will give you a sense of the scale. It's an admittedly crude outline of the new skyline. Heights have been eyeballed relative to the height of the church and based on their perspective renderings and plans. There are some uncertainties, especially with the building at the far right on the site of the recording studio, but it does show the full width of the project and the extension up Endicott Street. This is not yet a done deal, but the process is underway. Here's what the developers need to make this happen, something called 40R zoning. It is an overlay district intended to promote affordable housing. The state has certain requirements. One very important note: the city has a financial incentive to implement 40R. It will receive a one-time payment of $10,000 to $600,000 when it creates a 40R overlay. We don't know the formula for how much that would actually be. The city then also receives a bonus of $3,000 per unit when units receive building permits. In this case, a $204,000 bonus. In the scheme of things, it's not a lot of money for the city, and it's just a one-time payment. And as you'll hear in a moment, it won't begin to cover the costs the city will incur in the years to come. One unusual aspect of 40R zoning: the developer can go to the city with their proposal. The city then basically writes the zoning to accommodate the proposal. There are a couple of state reviews and a couple of public hearings. In the end, the city council votes. Key points: the council vote is a simple majority, i.e., 1 vote carries. In Salem, that means 6 votes out of 11. 40R is designed to overcome local resistance and control. So review boards have limited influence and they cannot deny a project. And there is effectively no appeal. An appeal requires that you post a bond to cover the developer's losses caused by any delay in the event you lose the appeal. The city considers that the initial community meeting has happened, even though those presentations were different proposals, and residents were not told they were part of a 40R process. The first public hearing on the preliminary application was held on August 1st, 2024, at which time the draft zoning for the LifeBridge site was presented. In the previous sections, we have tried to present slides attuned to an analysis of the proposed structure. We'd like to shift perspective slightly to consider other points of view. What does all this mean for the city as a whole, for other neighborhoods, for our business community? As we took a closer look, we found ripple effects. Let's look at one example: our police department. From the period 2020 to 2023, Salem Police Department received 1,400 to 1,800 calls a year related to the homeless in locations throughout the city. That's roughly 4 to 5 a day. Note that you rarely see these in the Salem News police log, so residents are often not aware. These calls strain our police and fire departments and put pressures on Salem Hospital. You'll find data on the GESNA website. This graph is based on actual police calls to the Margin Street facility over 1 year. A total of 144 calls, 1 every 2.5 days. 40% of calls were made for problems such as arrests, assaults, disputes, domestic fights and disturbances, larceny, undesirables, harassment, and drunk individuals. The graph shows that 60% of the calls were for well-being checks and medical mental health calls that do not require an emergency medical dispatch, otherwise known as EMD. What does that tell us? LifeBridge does not have trained staff who are able to support the basic needs of their clients. Hence, the police must be called. Remember, these numbers are only for calls to the LifeBridge facility itself and do not include incidents in other locations. And that's the big problem. LifeBridge should be providing services, but the situation on the street is evidence that they clearly aren't providing the right services or enough of them. If they don't have the capacity to do that at their current size, how will they be able to handle a larger, more expensive complex with a bigger population? The city will be left to make up the difference. Already, according to the city website, the Salem Police Department has taken a lead role in providing services including, quote, additional mental health clinicians, substance use disorder specialists, and peer recovery coaches, and outreach workers, end quote. Our police department has become, in effect, LifeBridge's subcontractor, without the benefit of compensation, while providing a service to the entire region. Taxpayers are subsidizing their business. Funding for LifeBridge services will always be precarious. Grant funding sometimes runs out. If there's a recession, donations drop. Political administrations change, and public program funding can get cut. Let's look at what this means for the economy of the city and its effects on taxation, something you could call the economic disinvestment loop. Initially, the homeless population begins to infringe upon neighbors, local residents, tourists, businesses, and their employees. It takes the form of encampments, panhandling, and feeling the need to be vigilant while walking the streets, all of which are familiar in Salem today. The companies closest to shelters and encampments feel the pinch on their businesses. It looks like less foot traffic, so revenues drop. Leases are renegotiated at lower rates, or the businesses just relocate. Residents also relocate, disrupting sense of community. That means commercial and residential real estate values drop, and therefore tax revenues drop. In response, city governments look to reduce budgetary expenses in public services, including schools, infrastructure, police and fire budget. They also stall any investment in public improvements. And then city governments begin to look elsewhere for additional revenue. That means an increase in property tax. When property taxes go up, so do rents. Landlords, whether the big guys or small operators, have to cover their increased costs. Which leads us back to where we began. Only this time, things get worse as less money chases more problems. In a tourism economy, the disinvestment loop occurs much faster than if the city were more strictly reliant on commercial real estate taxation, as in Boston. There, it is pandemic-related work-from-home issues that affect commercial occupancy and therefore city budgets. Here, the revenue stream from tourism dollars will be felt quickly and sharply. There is ample evidence of how this works in other cities that have dealt with the disinvestment loop for far longer, especially on the West Coast, but across the country. So what does that mean for the city's tax revenues? Remember that loop. Revenues drop, taxes go up. A big unintended consequence, a loss of affordable housing. Let's consider this effect on Salem's tourism. Salem gets more than 1 million visitors a year, year-round. Whatever you think of the witch trade, it keeps our storefronts occupied. It supports thousands of residents in retail, hotels, and hospitality. It supports restaurants, bars, coffee shops. It supports countless entrepreneurs, including tour guides, artisans, craftspeople. And it helps to support a world-class museum in the Peabody Essex. The base map here shows all the locations that Destination Salem recommends to visitors. There are obviously many more tourist destinations and businesses not shown. And not shown are the city's many special events. Residents, businesses, and cultural institutions have long been invested in diversifying our witch trade tourism with other initiatives to expand the tourism economy to a year-round sector. These include Salem Film Fest, Salem Arts Festival, Salem Jazz and Soul Fest, Salem Literary Festival, Salem So Sweet, Christmas in Salem, and countless other smaller events, including weddings. The large red stars indicate the 2 LifeBridge shelter locations. The small stars show encampment locations. Tourism has sustained Salem and kept our storefronts active in the past couple of decades. We can't afford to lose it. But in other cities that are reliant on tourism, visitors have voted with their feet. What is clear is if they feel unsafe, they read negative TripAdvisor experiences, word gets out. Conferences and events get canceled. Media coverage follows. Visitation spirals down. One sector that would take a big hit is hospitality. The hotels, inns, B&Bs, and countless Airbnbs. Most of us forget how significant this is. There's also a related secondary economic impact: legal services, insurance, banking. But increased homelessness, encampments, and panhandling also affect the viability of the places we all visit, the places that are part of our life. One of the questions that emerged is the nature of the LifeBridge and HarborLight model. So let's take a look at this from the point of view of the needs of the people who are homeless. The current proposal concentrates the homeless population and the previously homeless population in one location. It's what professionals in social services call warehousing. It only reinforces unhealthy behaviors and patterns that make it nearly impossible to break out of the cycle that drives homelessness. It throws together people with very different needs and issues, combining them all in a tense environment with some people with a history of violence. Newer models are decentralized and are based on a scatter site model. Apartments and group homes that are integrated in communities, which allows people to develop connections. Here's the essential difference. The centralized approach puts people in a dependent relationship with an institution, however well-meaning it may be. The decentralized approach puts people in a relationship with a community. Providing services is key to success. What does that mean? Mental health and substance abuse counselors, job counseling and training, health care, medication management, and housing placement. The services vary with the individual. But in 2023, LifeBridge provided one case manager for its 22 SRO residents, its 40 shelter residents, and its day clients who receive meals only, plus outreach to encampments. Just one. We tracked staffing over 5 time points from February 2023 to February 2024 and found shocking turnover and shuffling of staff, except upper management. How can individuals get access and time with the services they need, let alone develop the personal relationships that are key to recovery? There are many reasons to be concerned about LifeBridge's ability to manage even more people on a sustained basis, with no direct public oversight of its services or its finances. We'd like to give you some examples of other models and programs that have found success. There are others out there. We are not saying any single one of these is the answer. Some have downsides, but they suggest that there's a toolkit that the city has not explored. One city with nationally recognized success is Houston. How did they do it? They went all in on concepts such as housing first and continuum of care. More info is available on the GESNA website and in a short paper by Ed Sacco. Significantly, they developed a regional collaborative approach, working with government at all levels and a range of providers. The focus is on social and community integration and on recovery, with an emphasis on services. We mentioned scatter site housing. This is what it looks like. Places where you, your family, or your friends might live. These are owned by an organization on the South Shore that controls 700 units of scatter site housing. In fact, HarborLight already knows how to do scatter site housing. Here are 2 examples right here in Salem, which they call Boston Crossing. These were 2 rooming houses on Boston Street that they converted to small studio apartments in 2018, a total of 26 units. You might say the real estate market is too expensive, and you're absolutely right that it's a challenge. But like these, there are some buildings, some apartments available, and existing structures that can be adapted all over the North Shore. Even new construction can be built at a smaller scale in dispersed locations. And there are other recent innovative technologies for identifying housing opportunities and applying them to the scatter site approach. One way to accomplish more scatter site housing is gaining traction. Work with landlords. New programs offer landlords more financial incentives, payments if they join a tenant match program, ways to provide rent insurance and risk reduction, and use of master leasing arrangements. The idea is catching on, and landlords are signing up. Here's a new techie version of that idea that has had success in just the past few years. In 2019, Zillow, the online real estate company, established the Housing Connector, a nonprofit that connects landlords with those in need. Landlords sign on, get some financial benefits and support, and the residents get case management. But it's not just about incentives. Cities are learning that location matters. Portland, Maine just opened a new shelter, replacing one that was in the city center. It's now on the outskirts of town in a non-residential area served by a bus line and a shuttle bus. Portland has also gone all in on continuum of care process. New people are matched up with a caseworker. The emphasis is on finding housing and providing continuing supportive services. What does this take? A strong city government that proactively takes the lead, working collaboratively, identifying best practices, and listening to social service professionals, providers, residents, and the homeless community itself. Portsmouth, New Hampshire is in many ways our sister city, an old port town heavily dependent upon its tourism business. Over a 3-year period, it replaced its former facilities on the same site, well outside downtown, on a major road lined with retail, much like Route 114 in Peabody. Another example is here in Massachusetts, the Yawkey Center in Quincy, which opened last year. There are 2 noteworthy aspects of this project. It's an example of strong city leadership, which put together a complicated sale of properties, and it is also located outside of the city center. And a final example is also on the South Shore in Brockton. Yes, that's our former mayor presiding at the groundbreaking last year. The facility will open this year. What is most significant is that it is replacing an existing shelter that had been located at the edge of a neighborhood and the downtown for more than a century, a location very much like LifeBridge in Salem. Even without dependence on a tourism industry, Brockton clearly knows something that Salem has yet to learn. Our purpose for this presentation has been to highlight the proposal and its effects on the city. We shared with you our understanding of the many aspects of the homeless population on the North Shore, the plan for the new facility, the potential impacts on the city and tourism, and a view of what other cities have experienced. The next step in LifeBridge HarborLight's process is the passage of 40R zoning. What can be done to influence that? The obvious thing is to submit comments to the city, but others need to be brought into the conversation, especially the city councilors who will vote on the ordinance. And there must be a broader conversation that also includes other stakeholders, the people, businesses, and cultural institutions that have the most to lose when you consider the broader impacts of a regional homeless center in our downtown. The decision to approve the LifeBridge HarborLight project is more than a decision to construct a building. Focusing merely on a new facility sidesteps accountability. We need to bring the discussion back to the obligations LifeBridge has to the city, and especially to the very real needs of those it seeks to support. The LifeBridge HarborLight position paper, which includes further information, is posted on the Greater Endicott Street Neighborhood Association's website at www.gesna.org. salem.com.